Vietnam was a French colonial possession from the mid-19th century into World War II, when the Empire of Japan briefly occupied it. After Japan's defeat in 1945, the Vietnamese, led by communist revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, declared independence, but France was not yet ready to let go of its colonial possession. This sparked the First Indochina War. For 8 brutal years, Ho Chi Minh's forces, the Viet Minh, fought the French. In 1964, they scored a stunning victory at Dien Bien Phu, forcing the French to the negotiating table. At the Geneva Accords, Vietnam was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel, communists in the north and a non-communist Western-backed government in the south. Elections were promised to occur in 1956, but they never materialized. The United States, fearing the spread of communism in Asia, threw its support behind South Vietnam's leader Diem. President Eisenhower warned of the domino theory, that if North Vietnam fell to communism, other nations would follow. Under this logic, America began sending money, weapons, and advisors to prop up Diem's regime, despite its corruption and ongoing unpopularity. By 1961, President John F. Kennedy took office. The United States had over 900 military advisors in Vietnam. What began as a distant commitment to contain communism quickly became a dangerous, more deeper conflict for the United States of America.
As it is now, 1961, American involvement in the Vietnamese Civil War has begun increasing under President John F. Kennedy. Again, it's the communist North Vietnamese against the brave, valiant, defenseless South Vietnamese that we, as the bastion of democracy, must protect.
The Kennedy administration has begun sending military assistants and advisors to South Vietnam. However, they are currently against deploying combat personnel in Vietnam.
Well said, Kyle. I believe, as an American, that it is absolutely paramount that we as a people help to defend this defenseless country against the ravages of socialism. It is the ravages of socialist communism that have led to us only having one microphone to use. If we lived in a free democratic world, even Tile could have his voice amplified and heard. I am Jacob Jones, and this is Tile Krung. I need to make sure it's still recording.
When President John F. Kennedy took office in 1961, the Cold War was arguably at its height. From the Cuban Missile Crisis, to the Berlin Wall, to the current battleground in Vietnam, Kennedy saw the world as a conflict between the free West and the communist East, and Vietnam was its current front line. Though the United States had been supporting South Vietnam since the Truman years, Kennedy significantly escalated the American involvement. He inherited just under 1,000 military advisors in Vietnam, but by the time of his assassination in 1963, there were more than 16,000. Kennedy publicly insisted that the fight in Vietnam was the Vietnameses' responsibility, but privately he had authorized the expansion of counterinsurgency efforts, approved the use of napalm and defoliants, and supported the creation of elite South Vietnamese units trained by the CIA and American Special Forces. The real crisis came not on the battlefields of Vietnam, but instead in politics. President Diem was increasingly brutal and unpopular, and disconnected from his people. In 1963, a Buddhist monk lit himself on fire in protest to Diem's regime. Diem's repression embarrassed the United States, but Kennedy hesitated on whether or not to abandon his ally or to deepen America's involvement in the war. In November 1963, with Washington's quiet approval, South Vietnamese generals launched a coup and assassinated Diem. Just 3 weeks later, Kennedy was killed in Dallas. What JFK left behind was a Vietnam strategy built on a contradiction: more troops, but no full-scale involvement; more aid, yet less commitment to Diem's administration. His administration had laid the groundwork, not for peace, but for a full-scale American involvement in the war.
Today, President John F. Kennedy will be visiting Dallas, Texas. It is November 22nd, 1963. Although I am entirely convinced that nothing of note or notable will happen during this visit, he'll be driving down the center of town in an open-top car.
We choose to go do the other things because they are easy.
Much to my surprise, it appears something significant has happened today in Dallas. President John F. Kennedy, driving down the center of town, was shot by a sniper identified as former Marine Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee made an extremely improbable shot from the top floor of the Texas School Book Repository building, using an Italian-made surplus Carcano rifle, a rifle famed for its unreliability and poor accuracy. Due to all of these factors combined, I find it highly unlikely that Lee Harvey Oswald very likely that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and there was no influence by any government agencies, especially not the CIA, which John F. Kennedy definitely did not plan to reduce funding to.
On November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Just hours later, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took the oath of office aboard Air Force One. Inheriting the presidency and the growing crisis in Vietnam, Johnson faced a grieving nation and a new war with no end in sight. Johnson, a master of domestic politics, speaking that he has been in Washington since the 1930s, had never shown a deep interest in foreign policy, but now he was determined not to be the president that, quote, lost Vietnam, as he feared a U.S. withdrawal might damage American credibility and embolden other communist revolutionaries around the world. In 1964, Johnson seized upon an alleged attack on the U.S. ships in the Gulf of Tonkin to push Congress for broad war powers. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed with near unanimous support, effectively giving LBJ the blank check he needed to escalate the conflict. By 1965, American combat troops were on the ground. Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive bombing of North Vietnam, began. Johnson committed over 500,000 U.S. troops by the end of his term, yet the more the U.S. committed, the more difficult attaining a victory in the field became. The war in Vietnam was a different kind of war, unlike anything the U.S. had fought before. There were no front lines, and the Americans faced a deeply determined enemy on his home soil. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese fought a guerrilla war, blending in with civilians, fighting by night and retreating during the day. Back home, public support for the war eroded. Graphic television coverage brought the war into living rooms. As casualties rose and no progress was visible, the anti-war movement exploded, especially among students and veterans. By 1968, after the shocking Tet Offensive shattered the image of American progress, Johnson's presidency was collapsing under the weight of the war. In that March, he stunned the nation by announcing he will not be running for re-election. Lyndon B. Johnson had escalated the wars in hopes of preserving peace and credibility, and instead left the office with an America divided on what to do with the war, and the war far from over.
Today, in 1964, an American warship was attacked off the coast of North Vietnam by Vietnamese patrol boats. We find this event to be highly concerning, as it shows an increased level of aggression from North Vietnam, from the communist North Vietnamese towards American ships. This is a concerning development. LBJ is now ramping up American involvement in the Vietnam conflict. However, it is being met by manpower shortages.
In response to the increasing demand for military personnel, a draft has been instituted for men aged 18 to 26.
However, the draft has not come without its fair share of difficulties, with many people dodging the draft and not wanting to go perform their military service, as well as there being cautions about the mental stability about certain people that are being allowed in our army. There have been many such instances of a concerning new development known as fragging, where enlisted men will kill their own commanding officers as an act of defiance. Particularly concerning example of this that occurred recently was the murder of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, happening today at Paris Island by a disgruntled Private Pyle who loaded his rifle and in a manic episode shot his drill instructor. However, a quick-thinking hero quickly neutralized the threat. Recruit Private Pyle quickly shot and disposed of Private Pyle, putting an end to this horrifying incident. In fact, we've recently got a look inside of boot camp from some secret footage that was provided to us by Tyle Krung's cousin, Kyle Trung.
So you're a killer?
Sir, yes, sir!
Let me see your war face.
Sir!
You got a war face? Ah! That's a war face. Now let me see your war face.
Ah!
Bullshit. You didn't convince me. Let me see your real war face.
Ah!
You don't scare me. Work on it.
Sir, yes, sir!
It is January 27, 1968. A temporary ceasefire has been declared between North and South Vietnam so that citizens may celebrate the upcoming holiday of Tet. I am certain that both sides will respect this ceasefire.
Me too. It is January 30th, 1968. They did not, in fact, respect that ceasefire. There's been a massive offensive launched by the North Vietnamese all along the front line, the largest that has been seen so far in this war. It has been mostly stopped along most areas of the front, with only one settlement being captured by the North Vietnamese. However, it has severely crushed the morale of American and South Vietnamese forces, as they were under the impression that the North Vietnamese were on the ropes and nearly beat. However, them showing this immense offensive capacity has helped to destroy the morale of our troops. We have an interview with a soldier currently fighting along the front, trying to counter the Tet Offensive. Guy didn't look too good.
Yeah.
For American soldiers in Vietnam, the enemy wasn't just the Viet Cong. It was the jungle, the heat, the insects, and the unbearable sense that no place was ever safe. The terrain in Vietnam was brutal, with thick vegetation, sweltering humidity, monsoon rains that never stopped, booby traps everywhere. Soldiers feared that every step in Vietnam would be their last. Unlike wars fought in the past, this one offered no clear victories, no moving front lines, no way to know if the man standing next to you was a civilian or an enemy fighter. The stress on American troops was constant. For many, the trauma didn't end when they left Vietnam. Soldiers came home with deep psychological scars, what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, but in the 1970s there was little understanding or support for people with this condition. In early 1968, the Viet Cong launched a coordinated surprise attack during the Vietnamese New Year, the Tet Offensive. Over 100 cities and bases were hit at once. Though American forces repelled the attacks, the offensive shocked the U.S. public and shattered the illusion of progress. Military victory at this point in the conflict no longer seemed possible. Support for the war at home plummeted. The Tet Offensive became a turning point, not just militarily but politically. By 1969, Richard Nixon was the current president. He promised peace with honor, but instead escalated bombing campaigns. In 1972, he launched Operation Linebacker, a massive air offensive against North Vietnam's infrastructure meant to bring the North Vietnamese back to the negotiating table. Operation Linebacker was the first sustained bombing effort since Rolling Thunder. Using precision-guided munitions targeting railroads, power plants, and ports, it was militarily effective, but also devastating to the civilian population, and controversial for its impacts on said civilian population. For those who fought in Vietnam, the war didn't end when they came home. The trauma, confusion, and sense of betrayal followed them for the rest of their lives.
Newly elected President Richard Nixon has begun a policy known as Vietnamization. The policy of Vietnamization stipulates that American forces should be slowly withdrawn and replaced by newly trained South Vietnamese troops in order to maintain the same troop count on the front line, but slowly replacing the American troops with Vietnamese soldiers. In other news, Private Second Class Gump has been awarded the Medal of Honor today after carrying out a dozen wounded men after a ambush and failed airstrike that wounded most of his unit. Gump is an exceptionally gifted soldier, with one of his sergeants during boot camp even remarking that he must have an IQ of 160. It is good to see that our army is made up of such intelligent and talented individuals. Would you agree with that?
Indeed.
That is good.
We come with breaking news that the South Vietnamese government has fallen, with North Vietnamese tanks now rolling through the Straits of Saigon. Thousands of refugees are now attempting to flee the country, with an American aircraft carrier even pushing many of its own helicopters off its deck into the ocean to accommodate them. Yeah. He's fine. So that's left.
So, here we are live in an interview with Vietnamese whatever, Ho Chi Minh.
Idaho.
So, Mr. Minh, why do you do it is what you do? Why do you believe in communism? Very interesting. Do you believe that the North can win this war? How do you feel knowing that it is your Vietnamese Republic that believes the evil and horrible communism? Don't you know that communism is bad, Mr. Minh? Very interesting. So, what is North Vietnam's strategy for winning the war?
Bạn con ngu lắm, vậy nó đánh nhau.
Very interesting. Sorry, Mr. Minh. You're in my house now.
Spend all your time waiting for that second chance, for a break that would make it okay. There's always some reason to feel not good enough, and it's hard at the end of the day. I need some distraction. Oh, beautiful release. Memories seep from my veins. Let me be empty. Oh, and weightless, and maybe I'll find some peace.